Story number 1. I'm a 29-year-old guy from Brazil. I'm also a teacher at a university here, and I practice kung fu in my spare time. The political scene in Brazil is insane these days, and I've even heard stories about people getting attacked on the streets just because they're wearing red, which happens to be the color of President Dilma's political party. Well, a few days ago, I was heading home from work late at night. It was around 11 p.m. I got on the bus, and as there were no seats available, I just stood near the exit door as I always do. I got my MP3 player from my backpack, yeah, I still carry an MP3 player around, and turned on some The Black Dahlia Murder. I was there, minding my own business, silently singing along, when I noticed a guy, sitting in the back of the bus, staring at me with a really creepy look on his face. I thought it was funny at first, but he just didn't stop staring at me. I figured he must have been lost in his thoughts and just happened to be looking in my direction, so I went to the other door and looked at him again. You guessed it, he was still staring at me. I started paying attention to this guy. Even sitting, he was huge. His arms were as thick as my legs. He looked like the fucking Hulk from those old movies. I was just really tired from work that day, so I shrugged it off and went back to minding my own business. I mean, maybe he was just jealous because of my awesome beard. The point is, I had no energy to deal with that right then, and maybe I was just being paranoid. My mistake. My stop was coming up, so I pulled the string. I don't know how buses work where you guys live, but here they have little strings attached to the ceiling, and when you want to get off, you pull it. And a few seconds later, the driver stopped the bus and I got off, but not before seeing the huge guy get up. I started walking, feeling a bit nervous, and when I looked back, there he was, tailing me. He didn't even bother pretending he was just going home or something. He had his eyes locked on me the entire time. Now that we were both standing, I saw that he had a good 20 centimeters over me. I'm 1.82 meters by the way, so yeah, he was huge. I started walking faster, and his footsteps also got faster. My street was on the next left, and it's very, very dark at night, so I realized I'd have to run if I didn't want that dude to catch up to me. As soon as I turned the corner, I ran like there was no tomorrow, which was exactly the case, I think. I heard the guy start running as well. Fuck. There was no way I would outrun him. My house was still pretty far. I decided to go all in and stopped. I turned to face him, took off my backpack, held it in my hand, and waited. He yelled something to the effect of, "I'll kill you, you commie fuck," and attacked. I threw my backpack at his face, and when it was about to hit, he dodged. I even saw a smile on his face, like he thought it was fun that I fought back. Well, it turns out that's exactly what I was waiting for. Remember how I told you guys that I practice kung fu? I've been practicing it for over 10 years. When he dodged the backpack, my right foot was waiting to meet his jaw. It was only for a fraction of a second, but I saw his smile turn into a what the fuck expression as my foot touched his face. His eyes rolled up and he dropped to the sidewalk. I grabbed my backpack, and before booking it back to my house, I saw a shiny object sticking out of his pocket. A knife. Fuck, this guy wanted to do some serious damage, and all because I have a big beard and was wearing a red shirt. If it weren't for my passion for martial arts, I'd never see my wife or kids again. I won't lie to you and say that I had it all under control, that it was okay, and that I didn't feel scared. I was scared as fuck. By the time I got home, my legs were shaking so bad I had to ask my wife to help me to the nearest chair. She asked what was going on and I told her. We called the police, but the guy was already gone when they arrived. We are moving to a new place in a few days. After all, he followed me to my street and could be looking for me. The good part is, my wife always nagged me for doing my kung fu. After what happened, she's ordered me to keep practicing, and is thinking of joining, as well as bringing the kids along. At least something good came out of it. Story number 2. It was 2012, and my best friend Hannah had convinced me to join her on a weekend trip up north. She had, after searching for the longest time, found her dream car and was planning on traveling the 900 kilometers to the very north of Sweden to buy it. It was a second-hand two-door Suzuki Vitara in a purplish kind of color, and I must admit I didn't share her obsession with it. But, with her being the closest thing to a sister that I will ever get, I was happy to join her nonetheless. Hannah and I have always had each other, from the cradle and onwards. Sharing each other's love for adventure, we have traveled the world together. At the time this happened, we were both 21 and had recently returned from a trip in Asia. The man who was selling her the car had agreed to meet us at a small airport. When we arrived shortly before lunchtime, it had started to snow heavily. The first snow of the season, no less. The parking lot was almost empty, and when I saw the man standing outside the Vitara, I felt immediately concerned. He was dressed like a hunter. A lot of people in this area of the country live a lifestyle with hunting and fishing, so nothing strange with that really. But still, there was something about him that made me uneasy. He was nice though, smiling and waving to us, shaking hands with us both before walking us around the car, and pointing out all the tiny little flaws. He showed us the work he had done on the car, and showed the paperwork from the recently done engine repairs. He made the impression that he didn't want to hide anything. On the contrary, he made a show out of being very forthcoming and honest. The snowing had now intensified and we were getting cold. He opened the car door for us and said, "I got the paperwork at home, let's just close the deal over some coffee." Against all my instincts, I climbed in after Hannah, both of us now trapped in the back seat. I had no reason to feel threatened by this man, who had been nothing but pleasant to us, other than the alarm bells going off inside my head. I can't tell what it was that made me feel that way, but there must have been some sign that something was wrong, something that my subconscious tuned into. The man was constantly talking. Funny, since people from the north of Scandinavia are famous for never speaking a word more than absolutely necessary. He showed the stereo, told us about the features of the car, about the places we drove past, about the wildlife and the nature. There was not a silent moment. After about 20 minutes, I started to notice that we were in no way moving in the direction of civilization. Instead, it seemed we were driving further and further into the vast wilderness. It struck me that he had us in the back of a two-door car, driving us into unknown territory, and no one knew where we were. I looked at Hannah, who was happily listening to the man telling stories about the area, and I noticed she didn't look at all worried. Maybe I was totally overreacting. We drove past a group of people standing by the side of the road, hunters planning their day, or taking a break maybe. This truly is a very different Sweden compared to the city. The car finally stopped outside a small wooden cottage with no neighboring houses, apart from a small cabin that we drove past a few hundred meters down the road, but it had looked empty. We followed the man inside. He was still talking non-stop, and continued to do so until the moment the door closed behind us. Hannah kept asking things about the car, and I could sense that her voice had a new undertone now, a thin, sharp tenseness that made me wonder if she too had started to feel that something was not right. "I'll put the kettle on," he said, and as he passed us to go into the kitchen, he let his hand touch Hannah's hair, and he smiled smugly. "May I use the bathroom?" I asked politely, and made my way to the door with the little red heart on it. I was washing my hands when I saw something in the stained bathroom mirror. Something was hidden behind the water cistern. I pulled out a rolled-up plastic folder, and as I turned the pages, I felt my blood run cold. It was very violent porno pictures that looked like they had been cut out from magazines, and they were glued to the paper, surrounded by cut-out pieces of handwritten text. Put together, it made a horrifying story about how a woman was lured into a car with the promise of getting to buy the car cheaply, and then it quickly turned into a horror story. I know this will sound silly, but when we traveled together, Hannah and I had a code word for whenever we felt it was time to get out of a situation. We had never needed to use it, just joked about it, but now it came in handy. I walked out of the bathroom and looked at Hannah and said, "Potatoes. We forgot to buy potatoes, and that's too bad, because good God do we need some." The look on my face must have told her that the situation was no joke, and she said, "Oh, should we get some as soon as possible?" "The sooner the better," I replied. Hannah, always pretty and charming and capable of great acting, casually walked over to the man in the kitchen, tapped his shoulder, and said, "Excuse me, but I was wondering if I can go have a quick look at the cam belt." He huffed something about it being in good shape and handed over the keys. We got into the car and speeded off faster than the weather strictly speaking allowed. We left the car at the airport and hoped we hadn't made a terrible mistake. What if he reported it stolen? It would be embarrassing to explain to the police, but nothing happened. He didn't follow us, didn't report it in. We had to take the train since we had no plane tickets. The original plan had been to take the car home, and we didn't want to linger close to the airport in case he came looking for us. Later, Hannah asked what made me use the code word, and I told her about what I had found. It might just have been a fantasy, a sick game, and maybe he never would have done anything to us. But right then and there, I was convinced we would die if we didn't get out. Thank God Hannah didn't need any convincing or proof, just the code word. I truly think that if we hadn't talked about it so many times before, about how we would handle a situation where we need to get out fast, things would have ended very differently. Both of us knew that if either of us ever used the code word, it's time to get out, no questions asked. Just move. Story number 3. So this happened back when I was about 7 or 8 years old, but as a 22-year-old female, it's still fresh in my mind. My family lived in a small suburban town in northern Texas. It was a weekend, and my mother had taken me and my younger brother, who was about 3 at the time, to the local mall for school clothes, and I guess she was feeling particularly generous that day, because after clothes shopping, she promised to take us to the Disney store to pick out a toy. So we were in the Disney store, and I was looking at this little mermaid Barbie doll. It was one of those you could take into the bath and its hair changed colors. I was about to point it out to my mom when my brother started having a temper tantrum about something. I'm not sure what he was fussing about, but I remember her telling me to just wait a moment and turned her back to me while my brother started thrashing and trying to run off in the other direction. Since she was clearly preoccupied, I decided to just sit there and keep staring at the doll. That's when I noticed this man walk up beside me. He had noticed the doll I was staring at and started asking a few questions. What I liked so much about it, how many other dolls I had, if I thought his little girl would like it. I was kinda only half paying attention. I was way too absorbed in staring at the toy to even bother looking at the guy. I remember him asking how old I was, and the next thing I heard was my mother screaming my name as the guy picked me up and tried to fling me over his shoulder. I panicked, I screamed, and as the guy was running, I guess I had managed to kick and flail enough for him to lose his grip on me. So there I was on the mall floor, crying and confused as my mom scooped me up, little brother in tow, and screaming for security. Apparently the guy had just kept running, and he managed to get outside before they could call a lockdown on the building. We had never heard any news back from the police on finding the guy. I also never got my doll. It was creepy and traumatizing, and I really wish it had ended there, but it didn't. About 2 months later, we had a new family move in right across the street. I remember my mom commenting on how weird it was because the house had only been on the market for a week. It was a couple slightly older than my parents, with 2 little girls, one of which, Ashley, happened to be the same age as me. We became fast friends, and I was so excited when she ended up being put in the same class as me. My dad and Darren, Ashley's dad, had also become fast friends, as most of the people in the neighborhood were elderly, and he was just happy to have someone to talk to. We had a bunch of barbecues together, but Mama always insisted the family was weird, and thought it was rude how Ashley's mom never joined us. Anyways, since Mr. Darren, he insisted I call him by his first name, worked from home, and Mom was always busy with my 3-year-old brother, it quickly became the norm that Darren would be the one to pick me up from school with Ashley. He'd always joke that I was almost more his daughter than my parents', which was a comment I shrugged off, and every day he'd ask me if I wanted to stay the night. I'd never spent the night at someone else's before, but it sounded like fun, and eventually I'd convinced my mom to let me. The first weird thing I noticed was at dinner time. Ashley's mom was always really quiet and kept to herself, but I thought it was super weird that she had cooked dinner, set the table, then promptly went to her bedroom. When I asked Ashley why her mom wasn't joining us, I was promptly shushed and asked not to talk about her mom. So we ate, watched a few movies, then got ready for bed. This was weird thing number 2. When Ashley said it was bedtime, I said okay, and headed towards her bedroom. When I started crawling into her bed, she laughed and asked what I was doing. "We don't sleep in here, silly. We sleep with Daddy." She then took my arm and pulled me into her father's room, which I noted was not the same room her mother slept in. So her big sister, Ashley, and myself crawled up in bed with Mr. Darren. I thought it was really weird, but I'd never slept at anyone else's house before, and just assumed different families did stuff differently. And before you ask, no, he didn't do anything to me. Or if he did, my mind has effectively blocked the memory out. To my knowledge, it was just a normal night. Anyways, so the next day was Saturday. I went home, and the weekend carried on like normal. Monday was when shit hit the fan, so to speak. It was lunchtime, and our class had just piled into the lunchroom when I saw Mr. Darren sitting at our table and waving at us. Parents did visit during lunch on occasion, so that wasn't particularly weird. Him insisting on sitting next to me instead of his own daughter and having his arm around me the entire time was weird, though. I started feeling uncomfortable, but didn't say anything. Mainly because Ashley had been glaring daggers of jealousy at me the entire time, and I was scared saying something would make it worse. Lunchtime ended, and it was time for recess. I said bye and told Mr. Darren I'd see him after school, and we headed outside. The moment we got to the playground, Ashley confronted me. "Daddy likes you. Now we have to move again." I had no clue what she meant by that, but she stormed off before I could ask. Then I saw Mr. Darren by the trees just outside the playground. That was weird. Parents weren't allowed to join during recess, and all these red flags started going up. I didn't know what was wrong, just that it was bad and I shouldn't go over there. He was calling me though, and had something in his hands. I really didn't want to be rude, so I walked over anyways. He said he had a present for me, and gave me this pretty shiny pink-wrapped box. I opened it up, and guess what was inside? A color-changing Little Mermaid doll. I was super excited, but something in the back of my mind was saying it was bad. There was something important about this doll, I just didn't know what. Then he leaned down and whispered to me, "I remember how much you wanted this one." Now I was confused because I knew I'd never mentioned the doll to Mr. Darren before. I'd honestly forgotten about it. That's when things clicked. I dropped the doll, started to take a few steps back. I guess he noticed because he started trying to reassure me, I guess. He told me not to worry because he was going to buy me all the Barbies I wanted, that he was going to take me home tonight and I could be his little girl, and that he promised I'd be so much happier with him as my daddy. That's when I turned and ran. I bolted straight to the teacher's bench, crying my eyes out. I was too scared to even talk, so they took me to the counselor's office. Even after the counselor calmed me down, I never told them the whole story. I told them he had scared me and told me he was going to take me away that night and that he was going to be my new daddy. That was enough for the school to call the police and file a restraining order not letting him on school grounds. I guess I was afraid if I told them any more that my best friend Ashley would hate me. My parents took me home early. My dad went over and told Darren he was to never come near me again. Ashley wouldn't speak to me the next day, and a week later they moved. I never heard from or saw that family again. Looking back now, I realize just how much danger I was in. I also have some heavy speculations that Ashley and Skylar, the older sister, may not have actually been Darren's children at all. I don't really know. I never told my parents the whole story. I often wonder if anything would have changed if I did, but I still to this day have nightmares about him breaking into my room at night. So yeah, to the serial kidnapping bastard who tried to steal me from my mother, stalk me afterwards, and even become our neighbor just to get close to me, let's not meet again.